The day before my wedding, I suddenly gained the ability to read minds. I discovered that my wealthy and handsome fiancé, whom I married impulsively, was actually my dog that I lost many years ago. At this moment, the seemingly mature and composed man was actually roaring inside. Ah, I finally get to marry Alva Child. I'm so happy. You might not believe it, but I married a dog. Here's how it happened. The day before the wedding, I shyly took a shower, preparing to leap into the river of love with my matchmaker-recommended husband. But I accidentally bumped my head, and when I came to, I found that I had somehow gained mind-reading abilities. That wasn't even the scariest part. The scariest part was that I discovered my husband was the dog I lost years ago. A noble and aloof Samoyed. I glanced at the man who was busy unbuttoning his shirt. Oh no, I meant my husband, Abel Stevens. I awkwardly chuckled. Honey, why did you marry me? Once he heard my voice, Abel Stevens paused in his unbuttoning, turned around, and gently replied, because you're great. Honestly, I should have felt very touched, but I could hear his thoughts. What he was really thinking was, because the dog food you made before was delicious. Oh no, did you marry me just so I would make you dog food? Wait a minute, I thought of a rather subtle question. Dogs eat poop. I stared, somewhat in shock, at the tall man before me. His fair skin dazzled my 24-karat titanium alloy dog eyes, and his long eyelashes shadowed eyes as dark as obsidian, like an unattainable sculpture. Such a dog shouldn't, eat poop, right? He seemed puzzled, leaning closer, tilting his head. What are you thinking about? Thinking about whether or not you eat poop. I forced a laugh. I'm just curious. Did you know me before? Abel Stevens. No, but I fell for you, at first sight. You're full of it. What you really meant was, of course I remember you pulling my fur to make felt. I still remember that very well. Okay, maybe I'm not human, but you're definitely a dog. Still, a dog with a grudge. Why do you ask that? I swallowed hard. Just curious, how a handsome guy like you would fall for me. It still feels unreal. He suddenly laughed, and his eyes sparkled like a galaxy turned upside down, dazzling beyond belief. I'll spend the rest of my life answering that question. All right, to be honest, I should have been touched, especially if I ignored all the shouting in his mind. He was clearly screaming internally. I finally get to marry Alva Child. I just said some sweet nothings I learned. I wonder if she's happy. While I was lost in thought, Abel Stevens suddenly leaned in, playfully kissing my neck. I shuddered. I instantly imagined a huge Samoyed lunging towards me. No, 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 no. My heart can't take this. I need to check into a hospital to sort out what's happening, whether the world has gone mad or I have. I quickly pushed him away, stopping him from advancing further. Abel Stevens lifted his head from my arms, his eyes moist. In a hoarse voice, he said, "Don't you like me?" He looked utterly wronged. Oh my God, who can refuse a puppy? I felt guilty, like I deserved to die 1,000 deaths. I quickly reassured him, no, 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 I like you most. Abel Stevens buried his head in my neck. You don't kiss me anymore. But what he really meant was, you don't kiss me like you used to. Kiddo, you were a dog before. You could have been squished in my arms. But now you're a person. I can't dare to kiss you. In the end, Abel Stevens got his way, and we did the things he wanted. Don't ask. Just know that I'm a little pervert, and with those big eyes staring at me with such moisture, who could withstand that? I gazed at the man who had fallen into a deep sleep beside me, finally understanding why men typically want to light a cigarette after unspeakable activities, because I also wanted to smoke him. Abel Stevens was happily asleep, while I lay there, trying to keep my inquisitive eyes wide open, pondering this strange world. Do I really have mind-reading abilities? Abel Stevens. I took a look at the stunning Abel Stevens asleep beside me, who resembled a gorgeous goddess. and I couldn't help but question, was he really that Samoyed called Hamburger? Speaking of Hamburger, that dog had seemed different from others since I rescued him. For instance, he never wanted to sleep in his kennel, insisting on sleeping in bed instead. Also, he never went to the bathroom anywhere. He'd run to a designated spot, and wouldn't let me catch him doing it. Then it struck me. I recalled something odd that had happened with Hamburger. Hamburger was a dog I adopted from a rescue shelter, and I was immediately captivated by his watery eyes the moment I saw him. Though he was filthy, it didn't conceal his beauty. He was clearly a good dog. But this dog was a bit foolish. I mean really foolish. When I first adopted him, he would just stare blankly like a wooden log, not even barking back, and constantly appeared sickly. One day, I returned home to find him lying still on the ground, seemingly breathless. I freaked out, scooped him up, and rushed him to the vet, my wails echoing all the way there. But remarkably, as soon as we arrived at the vet's office, before the doctor even checked him, Hamburger suddenly convulsed a few times, then sprang to his feet, revived. He really sprang to his feet, his dark eyes suddenly filled with life, glancing around in confusion. He would howl a moment and then cover his mouth with his paws, pacing back and forth. Honestly, at that moment, I felt like I was reading something absurd from a dog's strange behavior. After that incident, Hamburger seemed to undergo a transformation. No, wait, he was still my dog. Previously, he would slouch in his kennel. Afterward, he wouldn't sleep in the kennel at all. He insisted on sleeping in bed. I only had one bed to prevent either of us from freezing to death. I had no choice but to invite him up. Who would have thought this dog seemed as though he'd been greatly wronged, sleeping several feet away from me, leaving enough space for 3 more people between us. It's said that dogs are clingy, but I didn't feel any urge to enjoy sleeping with a dog at all. One day, I had just prepared some water for a shower when I suddenly realized it had been a while since Hamburger had washed after returning from the vet. As they say, why wait for a better day? I called him into the bedroom to prepare for giving this little prince a bath. Hamburger was sleeping on the bed. Upon hearing my call, those adorable pink ears twitched, and he looked at me with sleepy eyes. Then it became surreal. He reacted like a mouse spotting a cat, his pupils dilating in shock. He barked at me, quickly sat up, turned his head sharply, and began mumbling angrily. I was utterly perplexed, unsure of what antics he was up to this time. I called him again. Hamburger froze, his back to me, and from this dog's posture, I detected a sense of restraint. As I was about to call him again, Hamburger moved. He dashed over to the wardrobe, grabbed a piece of clothing for me, threw it at my feet, then immediately turned back. The whole time, he didn't spare me a glance. Clothes. I looked down at my half-naked body, suddenly realizing what was happening. This dog might be shy. I couldn't help but laugh, thinking it was hilarious for a dog to be shy. Feeling mischievous, I tossed the clothing aside, pulled him close, and insisted he come take a bath. He fought back, trying to escape, even his for resisting, but during our tussle, he sheathed his sharp claws, giving me the upper hand. Hamburger looked like a virtuous woman, and I, like a rogue, staged a battle for the damsel's affection within the house. Eventually, I triumphed. I dragged and shoved him into the bathtub, and as he struggled, I teasingly nipped at his ear, causing him to freeze instantly, his fur exploding underwater. I was thrilled, laughing heartily. Is the ear nibble making you shy? You're a dog, for crying out loud. Dogs can't be shy. He looked at me, speechless, hiding his ear as if trying to shield it from my bites, like a pure white sea otter, adorably cute. Who could resist a shy little puppy? I was even more delighted. I kept teasing him. Am I not pretty? Is my body not good? Between me and those outside dogs, who's prettier? He looked even more speechless, refusing to look at me, stiffening his head averted. his white eyelashes dropping down to cover his eyes. I persisted, turning his dog face towards mine, and kissed him. Now, tell me, who's prettier? If I'm pretty, you should bark once. Hamburger looked like he had been choked by fate, staring numbly at me. After I had my fun, it was time to get to the bottom of this. I needed to know why my dog turned into a human and became my husband. After all, my life's latter half would rely on Abel Stevens. If he turned back into a dog, I would be at a loss. I wouldn't be able to divorce a dog. I'd just become a widow with a marriage certificate. Right. I waited for his face to return to normal, then casually mentioned, "It's a shame. My dog ran away from home and never returned. I guess he doesn't like me anymore." Sure enough, the moment I spoke, Abel Stevens' body went rigid, and I felt his heartbeat quickening. Then came an extended silence. I strained to listen to his inner thoughts, picking up only one line. "No, I like you." I wanted to listen more, but suddenly the phone on the bedside table rang loudly, startling us. Abel Stevens kissed my forehead and walked out with the phone. I almost figured out why someone would be calling during our honeymoon. Who's so inconsiderate? Before I could finish my complaints, my own phone started ringing. Why are there so many oblivious people out there? When will I finally uncover Abel Stevens' secret? I reluctantly answered the phone, and my best friend's gossiping tone hit me like a wave. "Hey, just waking up. It's already 2 in the afternoon. Looks like the wedding night went pretty well." She was right, though. I quickly shook my head, deleting last night's inappropriate messages. "So you knew I had a good night, and still called to disturb me? Spit it out if you have something to say." Her laughter from the other end intensified as she paused to say, "Honestly, how are things going with you, too?" I ran my fingers through my hair and replied vaguely, "It's good." "What's up?" It sounded like she sighed with relief on the other end. "Nothing much. Just thought it was surreal that you got married just 10 days after meeting your husband." To be honest, I also felt it was surreal. After all, Abel Stevens was far superior in every aspect, and we had known each other for such a short time, it just didn't make sense. Suddenly, my friend lowered her voice and asked mischievously, "Do you really like him? You aren't just after his money, are you?" This girl is really stepping on my toes today. It's almost like she's guessed it right. On the day of our blind date, I arrived and found Abel already on the phone, lowering his voice and saying he didn't want to go on a blind date. Funny, neither did I. Since we were both in the same boat, I confidently sat opposite him and greeted him. The instant he saw me, Abel froze. He was so stunned that he didn't respond even when shouted at several times over the phone. He just stared at me blankly. The fiery clouds behind him stained the sky red, and when a gust of wind blew, he snapped back to reality, quickly hanging up the phone. The glow in his eyes blended beautifully with the red haze around him, and he smiled gently at me, saying, "I'm Abel Stevens. It's nice to meet you like this." At that moment, I thought he meant, like this, as in a blind date. Looking back now, he must have meant it as in meeting me as a person again. After all, before that, he was a dog. Wait, that sounds a bit insulting. After that day, Abel began to pick me up and drop me off at work every day, naturally assuming the role of my boyfriend, even though I never officially agreed. Then came a day when someone wanted to set me up again, and he silently blocked me, putting all his savings in front of me, sincerely saying, "Let's get married. All these cards are yours." I shyly smiled and tried to refuse. "That's not how it should be." Abel fell silent for a moment and then continued, "After we get married, we don't have to have kids. It's all up to you. We won't live with our parents. No mother-in-law, daughter-in-law tension. I'll do the housework." Just as he was about to say more, I slammed my hand on the table, pulled the cards into my arms, and grinned. "Deal. Let's get married right now." I guess he struck a chord with me on every point. It turns out, I had mentioned to my best friend, before why I didn't want to get married back when he was still a dog. My fear of marriage stemmed from issues like kids, housework, and in-law relationships, and he managed to solve all of that, so I naturally felt inclined to get married. What a mischievous little dog he was. But when did he develop feelings for me? Was it when he was still a dog? Hey, hello, what are you thinking about? Have you forgotten I'm on the line? I snapped back to reality and replied, I haven't forgotten, just thinking about your question. She burst into laughter again. Just admit you want his body and his money. Ha ha. I told her to shut up and decided to share. Honestly, I used to think I could just go with the flow, but now I don't feel the same way. Her shocked voice came through. Hey, why? Was it because he performed really well last night? I blushed. Can you stop thinking about that? It's just that I find him interesting. Don't you think he resembles the dog I had before? She paused for a long time before saying, your thoughts are always so bizarre. Oh well, I don't mind. Just thinking about how Abel Stevens was a dog back then makes me happy. I can't wait to tease him some more to find out why he switches between being a human and a dog. As we were chatting, Abel came back in, and I swiftly ended that rather unproductive conversation. I sat up and indicated for him to join me on the bed because I wanted to discuss the dog topic with him. But how do I bring it up without raising his suspicions? Abel pulled back the covers and lay down, saying, sorry, something came up at work. I waved my hand dismissively. Work is important. I totally understand. He looked at me for a long time, took my hand, and quietly said, you're important too. And his ears turned red. I couldn't help but be amused. He was clearly thinking, is what I said too forward? Will she hate me for it? I squeezed his hand back and complimented him like I did the hamburger before, saying, you say sweet things so well. I really like you. Sure enough, his heart started racing. If Abel Stevens' heartbeat were to become a piece of art, it would undoubtedly be a lovely pink bubble filled with hearts. I cleared my throat and tentatively ventured, earlier, we were talking about dogs, and just now, my best friend called and asked if I wanted to get another puppy. Abel's smile froze on his face, his mouth quickly drooping, and even his eyelashes seemed to droop, but he still nodded at me, waiting for me to continue. Inside, however, he was already protesting. Isn't I enough? Do you need another dog? Does his fur shine as smoothly as mine? Is his tail as beautiful as mine? Is he more handsome than me? I'm not a dog anymore. I'm a human, and I won't compete for affection with a dog. I could hardly contain my laughter when I heard his inner monologue. He was clearly having an internal struggle. I couldn't help but tease. My friend mentioned it could be a Samoyed, white and with dark eyes, just like the one I had before. As soon as I finished speaking, Abel stiffened a bit, looking at me with disbelief in his dog-like eyes, long eyelashes hiding all his emotions while his hair seemed to protest as well. Yet he remained outwardly calm and composed, stating, it's your choice. If you want to get one, go for it. But I could definitely hear him mutter internally, I'm not angry, I'm not angry. It's just a foolish Samoyed, merely a substitute. I couldn't help but laugh. This guy appears to be a composed and reserved professional, but he's so funny behind the scenes. Are you still the Abel Stevens, who commands the world? After a bit of fun, it was time to be serious. I gently ruffled his soft hair, saying, as much as I like the idea of a puppy, I won't get one. He looked up at me, asking, why not? I gazed deeply into his eyes and said seriously, because of the Samoyed I had before. I took care of him for so long, but he still ran away from me. I don't want to go through that again. I'm afraid of being abandoned. Abel froze for a moment, the light in his eyes shattering, his eyebrows furrowing uncontrollably. I heard him whisper in his heart, I'm sorry. After Abel left for work, I had a day off with little to do, and I couldn't help but think back on what I had heard from Abel's heart. Although I really didn't want to admit it, the time I spent with Hamburger was one of the darkest periods of my life. That's because I lost my most important friend. My childhood friend had leukemia from a young age, and the doctors determined she wouldn't live past her 20s. Sure enough, by her 22nd birthday, her condition worsened considerably. That was during really busy times for me. The stress of graduation and the pressure of postgraduate exams weighed heavy on me, pulling me in all directions. I'll never forget that night after my exam ended. Just as I was stepping out of the exam room, still smiling, my phone rang. It was the hospital. In that moment, I knew she was leaving us. When I walked in to see her one last time, her body was already filled with tubes, and the light in her eyes slowly dimmed. To be honest, I can't even explain what that felt like. I thought I would cry, but instead, I found myself in a daze, feeling unreal. All around me were the faces of those who had passed or were fighting for their lives. While the doctors remained calm and composed, everyone was overwhelmed with misfortune and discontent, feeling numb. From that moment on, I couldn't sleep. I began taking sleeping pills because every single night, I would recall the vacant look in my friends' eyes in the emergency room, and the pain on everyone's faces. The cries of anguish echoed in my ears every night. I went to the hospital to get checked out, telling the doctor that my heart wouldn't settle. It felt like it was going to burst, but even the most advanced instruments couldn't detect what was wrong with my heart. Nonetheless, my body felt ill. It was around that time that I met my current psychologist, who later became my best friend. She suggested I get a pet to help alleviate some of my burden. So, I adopted Hamburger from a shelter. From the moment I first saw him, I cried. His sincere eyes and smile were a reflection of a part of me that I had lost. Just like that, I brought Hamburger home. At first, we had such a happy time together. I even thought I was starting to feel better. With him by my side, it felt like the shadows of the past stayed away. But soon, things took a turn for the worse. Hamburger started getting sick. I couldn't help but wonder if I was jinxed. Why did everyone and everything close to me start falling ill? Initially, Hamburger would faint, but would recover after a while, then hug me with his paws, whimpering as if to comfort me. I went to several veterinary hospitals, but no one could tell me what was wrong with him. His episodes worsened. The time he spent awake grew shorter, and most days, we would just lie in bed together. Every time he woke up, he would awkwardly shift his body to rest his head on my shoulder, smiling tiredly at me and wiping my tears with his body. Then I began to suffer from insomnia again, finding it hard to distinguish between reality and imagination. I was constantly checking his breathing, always afraid he might suddenly leave like my childhood friend did without us even getting to say goodbye. One night, I woke abruptly with a jolt, and Hamburger's eyes mirrored the hazy gaze of my friend just before she passed. But he was still there, lying by me, and I asked him curiously, "Are we both alive?" For a moment, Hamburger stopped smiling. We locked eyes, and after a long silence, he nudged my forehead with his nose, maintaining that position until I slowly came to. I hugged him tight, saying, "If you want, you can leave me. I'm a bad luck charm. Everyone who stays with me ends up sick." He covered my mouth with his fluffy paw, growling in protest. I couldn't help but laugh at how he seemed to understand my words. So, I began telling him about my friend. Strangely enough, this time, he stayed awake long enough to listen to my rambling story. Every time I got too emotional and started to cry, he would gaze at me and lean in to lick away my tears. In the end, just when he couldn't hold out anymore, and was about to fall asleep, I whispered, "I don't want to experience losing someone like that again. I'd rather you leave me than watch you die in front of me. This way, I can still hold on to hope, thinking you just run away because you didn't want me anymore, that you're living happily somewhere else." I couldn't possibly interpret a dog's thoughts. I just felt that after I said that, Hamburger's entire body stiffened for a moment as if he was trying to open his eyes with great effort, but his strength was fading fast, and he fell asleep. Days turned into weeks, and when I went to get my medication from the doctor, I came home and opened the door. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows into the bedroom, painting the entire room in bright red hues. With the soft chime of dusk ringing with a joyful tune, I stood there, gazing at the empty room, and suddenly laughed. Hamburger was gone. I never found him again. Unknowingly, it has been half a month since I married Abel Stevens. Ever since I realized he was Hamburger and learned the reason for his departure, I no longer felt the urge to read his mind. First, I was afraid of being dragged back into painful memories. Second, I felt shy. I believed it was better if we kept some private space in our married life. Otherwise, life would lose some of its charm if I knew everything he did. Oh, but I gradually discovered that only by looking into his eyes could I truly understand his heart. But when I didn't look into his eyes, our interactions felt somewhat awkward, as if I was deliberately avoiding him. For example, when he wanted to cuddle with me as we slept, I would subtly shift away. He wouldn't say anything, but I would catch glimpses of his gaze that revealed his thoughts. What's wrong with Alva Child? Does she dislike me now? Am I not handsome? That shouldn't be the case. I dressed up just for her. Does she prefer that substitute dog instead? What's so special about it? It just has a tail. Why don't humans have tails? So pathetic. I swear, who wouldn't love a cuddly, affectionate dog? I just didn't want to pry into his sweet, pink thoughts. The more I thought about it, the funnier the situation became. Eventually, I couldn't resist turning around, hugging him tightly, and petting his head. Oh, wait, not a dog's head. I mean his head, since he's human now. In this situation, Abel Stevens would wrap his arms around me casually, drawing me close. I could even imagine him in the dark, unable to hold back a smile. If humans had tails, I bet Abel Stevens would reach all the way to the sky. Strangely enough, this thought made me happy too. This kind of interaction lasted for over half a month until one day something unexpected happened, forcing me to confront my feelings. That evening, right after returning home from work, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Is this Abel Stevens' family? We've encountered an issue at the lab and need you to come as soon as possible. What? My mind went blank for a moment, and I struggled to ask, what's going on? On the other end, they said, there was an explosion at the base's chemical fuel facility. Abel Stevens. Before they could finish, I snapped. I immediately headed to his company's base. I couldn't sit still the whole way there. Old painful memories flooded back, overlapping with the current situation of Abel Stevens. I tried hard to control my thoughts, but my mind, like a net, gathered all the negative thoughts. What if something really happened to Abel Stevens? What am I going to do? I asked myself this question countless times on the way, and eventually found an answer. If he dies, then I'll die with him. I've lived enough of this life anyway. When I got out of the taxi, I could see the base from a distance, cordoned off with police tape. It was glaringly bright. I took a few deep breaths and then ran over, not even bothering to pick up my lost high heels. And then, I saw this dog sitting on a stretcher, his left leg wrapped in bandages. He looked calm and composed, almost as if he wasn't the one injured, and he was still instructing others on the aftermath, signing documents in his hand. I was worried for nothing, right? After taking a long look and confirming he was fine, I marched over and stood tall, looking down at him. When Abel Stevens saw me, he froze for a moment, and the cold expression on his face immediately melted away. He became warm, and then his gaze dropped down, noticing my bare feet, and he anxiously asked, Alva Child, what are you doing here? Guess why I'm here. Where are your shoes? They got lost while I was worried about you. This place is full of chemicals. If you step on me, you might get hurt. Saying that, he gently grabbed my ankle and pulled me toward him. I gazed at him, still a bit angry, while my foot was resting on him. For a moment, we formed a bizarre scene. and amidst the chaos, we became the center of attention. I noticed several employees looking over, some even whispering, "Whoa, this is a bit embarrassing." I sighed and looked at his innocent eyes, feeling a familiar weakness. That face of his really makes it hard to stay mad. I asked, "Where are you hurt? Does it hurt?" He sat on the stretcher, and when he heard my question, the corners of his mouth involuntarily dropped. Yet, he stubbornly refused to admit, "It's nothing, just got injured while evacuating." Boy, you're not really saying that in your heart, are you? Lying dogs get their paws smacked by their teachers. You know, what he was really thinking was, "I hurt. It really hurts. Just stay with me like before, and I won't feel the pain." The relief of not losing him, and his internal struggles made me unable to help but smile. But I still suppressed it and maintained a serious face, saying, "Doesn't hurt? If you're fine, then I'm leaving." And I deliberately turned to walk away. Sure enough, in the next moment, my wrist was tightly held. I turned back to look at him. Abel Stevens was pitifully sitting on the stretcher, looking up at me with obsidian-like eyes filled with starlight, sincere but a bit annoyed, saying, "I hurt. It really hurts. So please don't go, okay?" I felt a rush of joy in my heart that I couldn't contain, and I glanced down and smiled, then sat beside him on the stretcher, casually rubbing his soft hair a couple of times. Abel Stevens turned his head slightly away from me, a bit uncomfortably, and his ears began to redden. I heard him thinking, "It seems that being with Alva Child really makes the pain less. Oh, what a silly dog." The accident was an unexpected explosion caused by the low purity of the fuel delivered. Although there were no casualties, the company's losses caused Abel Stevens to get busy again. Because of his leg injury, I suggested that we sleep apart at night. I would sleep in the study, worried that I'd accidentally bump into his injury while I was sleeping. When I proposed this idea and put it into practice, Abel Stevens fell silent for a moment before nodding in agreement. I didn't even need to read his mind to know. He always had that look, his eyelashes lowered, his lips pressed tightly together when he nodded, which was a sign of unhappiness. He must be protesting inside, but I couldn't indulge him this time. After all, he was a patient now, not the same as before when I would tease him. This thought persisted until one night when I realized I had underestimated Abel Stevens. That night, for some reason, I couldn't sleep at all, my mind uncontrollably wandering to how Abel Stevens turned into a human. With my eyes closed, I was lost in thought when the door suddenly creaked open, followed by the sound of quiet footsteps. Part of the mattress beneath me suddenly sank. I felt the change in air movement around me, as if someone was testing if I was asleep by hovering a hand over my eyes. Without thinking, "It must be that silly dog," I deliberately pretended to be asleep, curious about what he would do next. After confirming I was asleep, Abel Stevens stealthily climbed up, carefully lifting my covers before sneaking inside. I was holding back laughter. This silly dog really cared that much about us not sleeping together. I sighed internally, planning to compromise and let him sleep next to me. But then Abel Stevens made another move. I felt the warm touch of his hand, as he gently intertwined his fingers with mine. I immediately went back to pretending to sleep. I can't believe I have to sleep alone, even in such a big bedroom. I heard him mutter softly, "You used to love holding me while we slept. Why are you complaining now that you're human? Isn't karma interesting?" When Abel Stevens first came to my place as a dog, he would sleep separately, refusing to sleep with me. Who would have thought he'd turn around and act so clingy today? "Let's sleep," I said in relief that he didn't say anything more. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hold back. He leaned closer, cautiously placing a kiss on my forehead, then happily intertwined my hand with his and fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, sure enough, there was no one beside me. Abel Stevens was back where he was supposed to be, separated by a wall, as if what had happened last night was just a figment of my imagination. I asked him if he slept well, and he innocently told me he slept very well. HMPH. I wonder, who has dark circles under their eyes? At first, I found his nightly antics amusing, but I soon realized that every night he would sneak in for his antics, coming up with different ways to cuddle me, because I was worried about accidentally hurting his injury while I slept. And he was worried that I would discover he wasn't sleeping well either. I thought if we continued like this, we would both be exhausted. So that night, just when he moved closer to me, I suddenly opened my eyes. Abel Stevens was taken by surprise, his half-closed eyes widening momentarily in shock. But it was just a fleeting moment. In the next second, his warm hand pressed against my eyes, blocking my view of his flustered expression. "How long have you been awake?" I heard him ask, a bit annoyed. I hugged him, choosing to be blunt. "I've been awake since you sneakily came in the first time." Abel Stevens froze, falling silent for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. His hand continued to cover my eyes, and I clearly felt my eyelashes brushing against his palm's warmth. Finally, he slowly said, "I'm sorry." I broke free from his grip, leaned in, and kissed the corner of his lips, whispering in his ear, "No need to apologize, Abel Stevens. You don't have to be so tense. I'm your wife. You need to believe that I love you. Our relationship shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells." Yes, I love him, no doubt about it. I previously thought my marriage would be peaceful, a partnership where I kept my heart closed, fearing that if I opened up, I would be hurt again. However, after the explosion, I came to a harsh reality. When I learned that Abel Stevens might die, I went completely mad. I had only had pain when my childhood friends or hamburger left me, but the thought of Abel Stevens leaving made me want to die with him. Abel Stevens' eyes seemed to glow slightly, merging with the darkness of night as he said, Alva chilled. I knew what he was going to say. His inner world had already told me his thoughts and secrets. I needed to accept that he had once been hamburger. Since I couldn't change anything, I couldn't hide from it anymore. After all, we were married. This kind of avoidance wasn't fair to this big dog, and it wasn't fair to Abel Stevens either. We both feared believing in each other's love, scared of being abandoned if we made a mistake. Also, he genuinely cared about the fact that I once raised him. That's why in our daily interactions, he would try to appear very mature and strong, afraid that I might think he was childish. I stroked his head and asked, Abel Stevens, will you leave me? Like that dog named Hamburger. This time, Abel Stevens didn't shy away but looked at me firmly, and leaned over, imitating me, whispering in my ear, "No, I will never leave." That was enough. I didn't want to dwell on how he became a dog and then a human. All I needed was his assurance that he would never leave me. What he was or had been was irrelevant. All I needed to know was that he was my husband, and would never leave me. That was all that mattered. I hugged him tightly, incoherently sharing all my stories with him. During this time, just like in the past with Hamburger, Abel Stevens listened quietly, but unlike that silly dog from before, who could only wipe my tears with his paw, Abel Stevens firmly told me that he would never leave. Endlessly, as the first light of dawn shone on the horizon, the summer sun slowly rose. I finally entrusted my chilled heart to him completely, embracing tightly with the rising morning light. It felt wonderful. We had both fallen into the glow of the sun, never to be reborn. *** from Abel Stevens' perspective. ***.
A few years ago, I had a car accident. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital, but it was a veterinary hospital. I was shocked by everything in front of me. I felt that something was seriously wrong in this world. After all, how could I, all alone, have ended up in the body of a dog? I lay in the hospital bed, half closing my eyes to take in the place. Oh, and there was this dog owner next to me, crying her heart out. She looked completely distraught, sobbing non-stop, even hesitant to touch my fur. She wouldn't even dare to touch the dog's fur. just staring at the doctor's examination in a panic, tears streaming down her face without a care in the world. How could there be someone so prone to tears? I couldn't stand her crying any longer, so I reluctantly nudged her, trying to signal that I was still alive. But she just stared at me for a moment before crying even harder. She flopped down on the floor, wailing, "Finally, it's not my bad luck that's hurting you. Thank you for not leaving me." I was utterly dumbfounded. What on earth had happened to her that made her so terrified of being abandoned and so self-deprecating about her bad luck? Eventually, I was taken home by this woman named Elva Child. At first, she was careful with me, but later, she became more and more reckless. For example, she actually dared to make me sleep in the dog bed alone. I bit the sheets to indicate that I wanted to sleep on a bed, not in the doghouse. Who would have thought that this woman would flip the blanket and forcibly pull me over to sleep with her? This couldn't be happening. I had to uphold my dignity as a male dog. She looked at me pitifully and said, "If you sleep alone on the bed, I'll freeze to death. Can you bear to see that?" And then she gazed at me with those sad eyes. In the end, we ended up under the same blanket, but I made sure to keep my distance from her. Yet she, half asleep, would curl up next to me. Honestly, I got used to her hugging me, and it was kind of nice. This habit is not good. I need to break it. One day, while I was sleeping soundly, she suddenly called my name in a sweet voice. I turned around and almost died again. For heaven's sake, couldn't she be a bit more modest as a young woman? Her clothes were all rumpled with a disgrace. She was asking me to take a shower, but I didn't want to go. Little did I know, this woman was so wild. She chased me all over the house, saying she wanted to wash me. When I struggled, afraid of hurting her, I accidentally got dragged to the humiliating bathtub. "Sister, I really can't take a bath with you. We're not the same gender." While I was still desperately trying to get away, she suddenly playfully bit my ear. I looked at her in shock and saw her smiling proudly, which, by the way, was quite charming. But this crazy woman, how dare she? Damn it. "I'm not clean anymore," that woman kept saying. "I'm giving you a bath, and it's me, this beautiful woman, doing it for you. Are you moved?" Murd, I can't even make him move. She seemed to notice my resistance, forcibly turning my doggy head to face her and said, "Come on, you're a dog. You can't be shy." "Madam, I was originally a person, and a man at that. I'm just getting started. Tell me, who looks better, me or those dogs outside? Honestly, I can't understand your logic. Why would a person compare herself to a dog?" But she kept pestering me with the question, so I could only glance sideways at her features. When she's not crying, she's rather pretty, but still not quite my type. Wait. Suddenly, a cold sensation hit me, and I stared at this crazy woman in shock. She actually kissed me. What was I just thinking? My head spun a little, and my heart began to race. What was my taste in beauty again? Why did I suddenly forget? It felt like her kind of charm. I broke free from her embrace, almost as if on instinct, nodding slightly. When I regained my composure, I quickly buried myself in the water, trying to hide, but I couldn't escape her boisterous laughter. "Just drown me already." In the end, she gave me a bath, using bubbles to style my fur, braiding it, and splashing water on me. Was it playtime or a bath? A few times I almost managed to escape, but she came over and kissed me again. "If you run away, I'll kiss you." I was so overwhelmed, I gave up resisting and let her wash me, her soft hands gliding across my face, as her long hair fell around us during our little struggle, mingling with my fur a black and white blend. This scene felt like feathers gently brushing against my heart. I must say, when she doesn't speak, She looks quite gentle. If only she wouldn't threaten to kiss me. I ended up living in Elva Child's house. She named this dog Hamburger. What a ridiculous name. It sounds awful. However, she does make pretty delicious hamburgers, so I'll let it slide. Who knew that while I was elegantly eating a hamburger, she suddenly leaned in and poked my face. You're really good looking. Your eyes are as beautiful as the starry sea. How can you be so gorgeous? I almost choked and turned away, not wanting to look at her. How could this woman flatter me so well? She sat her down beside me and asked, "Are you shy again?" "You can't be shy. You're a boy dog, so you need to be masculine. I like mature dogs. If you're too childish, I won't like you at all." Ha ha ha. I sat her on the ground, allowing her to pat me, feeling helplessly amused that she actually liked mature dogs. Okay, I'll remember that. Wait, why should I care about what she likes? Why do I need to remember? Forget it. I lived in her house for a long, long time, enough to almost believe that I had indeed died and been reincarnated as a dog. I always stayed with her, and while she always laughed, I sensed that deep inside, she was actually very scared. From time to time, she would wake up from nightmares, curling up in the corner of the bed, lost in thought. For the first time in my life, I felt heartache, but there was nothing I could do. All I could do was walk over and use my paws and fur to wipe away her tears. In those moments, she would ask me, "Will you leave me?" "I won't." Elva chilled. She would smile, tears streaking her face, and it looked awful, but I wanted to kiss away all her sadness. "You're lying. A dog's life is shorter than a human's, so you'll definitely die before me." For a moment, I didn't know how to comfort her. Yes, I am currently a Samwed. I cannot be with her forever. I can't wipe away Elva Chew's tears as a human. I don't know if the heavens heard my prayers, but one day, I suddenly woke up to find myself lying in a hospital bed. That's right, I was a human lying in a hospital bed. All my family were overjoyed, and the doctors breathed a sigh of relief, saying how fortunate it was that I woke up. Otherwise, I might have suffered brain death. To my surprise, I didn't feel the joy of escaping calamity. The first thing that came to my mind was, what would happen to Elva Child if I left? Would she feel like she was the reason I died? If she was sad alone at night, who would wipe her tears? Sure enough, when my soul once again escaped from my human body and returned to the dog's body, the first thing I saw was Elva Chew's vacant expression. I struggled to get up, nudging her with my paws, trying to show her that I was okay. She felt my movement, stiffly hugging me, and said, "Am I dreaming again?" "In dreams, you're the one who moves." Feeling sorrow for her was truly like this. I hugged her tightly, repeatedly telling her in my heart, "I won't die. I will never leave you." But she couldn't hear me. If one day she could hear my inner voice, she would know how reluctant I was to part with her. The longer I stayed awake as a human, the less time I had beside Elva Child. It was beyond my control. The body of a dog decayed visibly, and along with that, Elva Child's extremely sensitive heart also deteriorated. She often blurred the lines between reality and illusion. Even though I tried to cheer her up, she always thought it was just a dream, while in reality, I was still sick. This state continued for a long time, and I had no way to change it. Fate could not be defied. I learned how hopeless it really was. One night, as if she knew I was about to break down, she stayed up all night, murmuring her past, while I quietly listened, carefully kissing away her tears. My Elva Child deserves the best things in the world. There cannot be only tears. In the moment when dawn broke, she closed her eyes and told me, "Oh, so you won't have to die in front of me. At least let me believe you're living well somewhere else." Then she didn't glance at me again and walked straight out the door. They say that cats and dogs tend to distance themselves from their owners before they die, not wanting to make them sad. I never thought that one day I would do the same. With my last ounce of strength, I ran far away, finding an unknown corner, and finally exhausted, I fell asleep. When I woke up again, it was a complete awakening. I lay on a hospital bed, as if I had just gone through a long dream. After being discharged from the hospital, I kept searching for her whereabouts, but I didn't even know her last name. I only remembered the name Alvaschild. The place where I once lived was also growing hazy in my memory. Sometimes I even doubted whether a person named Alvaschild ever existed. Wasn't it all a dream after my car accident? Until one day, when I couldn't decline an invitation from my teacher and ended up at a blind date party. Initially, I just wanted to go through the motions while talking about this blind date with my friends on the phone. One of them teased, "Aren't you waiting for your dream girl, Alvaschild?" Just as I was about to respond, a familiar voice suddenly rang out in front of me. "Hello, I'm Alvaschild. Nice to meet you." At that moment, I felt like time stopped. After years of not seeing her, my Alvaschild seemed to look even more beautiful. The memory of the tearful little girl vividly blended with the graceful and mature woman in front of me. In the days, I felt that time didn't seem so cruel anymore. On the other end of the phone, they were still shouting, but I couldn't focus on them. I quickly hung up and smiled at her. I said, "Hello, my name is Abel Stephens. I'm happy to meet you in this way. Dear Alvaschild, please believe me, this time, I will never leave without saying goodbye."
Abel Stevens was extremely busy after that explosion, so for convenience, he didn't go home for lunch. Just the thought of having to wait over 100 days without seeing my beloved made me restless. So, that day on a whim, I went to his company to bring him lunch without telling him. When I arrived at the company reception, the receptionist told me that Abel Stevens was in a meeting and asked me to register and wait. Although Abel had told me many times that I could just say I was his wife to get in, I felt too shy to say those words out loud, so I waited outside. Suddenly, a few young ladies came over and started chatting excitedly, resembling how I usually fangirl over couples. "Hey, did you hear? I heard from Matthew Blake and the others about the factory explosion and rumors about Abel Stevens." Rumors about Abel Stevens. I actually didn't want to listen, but those rumors crept into my ears anyway. "Yes, it's not my fault," one of the girls continued. "Our Abel Stevens doesn't change his expression no matter what. Not even when he got injured in the explosion. He was still directing the work." But guess what happened next? His legendary mysterious wife showed up, and suddenly Abel said he was in so much pain. The look in his eyes was just so pitiful. "Oh my God, are there any pictures? I want to see." One girl excitedly pulled out her phone with shining eyes and continued, Look, Abel Stevens' wife's foot is even on his clothes, probably to avoid contaminating herself with chemicals." The moment the photo appeared, the group of girls went wild. They were as excited as if they, themselves were getting married, squealing like excited groundhogs saying, "Oh my gosh, look at the look in Abel Stevens' eyes. Who could resist a big sweet dog like him? Oh dear, another day crying over our beautiful love. I want to touch Abel Stevens' head, but I'm afraid he'd twist my skull off." Then, there were bursts of laughter. Help me. As the person involved, I felt utterly embarrassed. Thank goodness I didn't say I was Abel Stevens' wife. Otherwise, I would have died of embarrassment. Just then, someone suddenly called out to me, "Sister-in-law." I was so startled that I nearly jumped into a crack in the ground. A handsome guy with a sunny disposition approached, towering at nearly 6 feet 3. His features sharper than Abel's. His tan skin radiated a sense of security just from a glance. The girls at the front desk fell silent, and all said in unison, "Hello, manager." Then they began to look at me suspiciously. I curiously gazed at him and politely asked, "You were calling me?" He nodded and smiled, revealing bright white teeth. "Sister-in-law, you don't remember me? I'm Matthew Blake. I was the one who called you about the factory explosion. Afterward, I almost got killed by Abel. You have no idea. He didn't care about my dignity, and almost knocked out my front teeth." I forced a laugh, surprised by how familiar he seemed. "Oh, thank you for that day." He scratched the back of his head, laughing. No problem at all, sister-in-law. Just say some good things about me, in front of Abel so he won't keep hitting me." I couldn't help but laugh. He was quite amusing. Before I could process the situation, he pulled me over to the front desk and said, "This is your Abel Stevens' wife. From now on, just let her through. You wouldn't want to see Abel at home getting punished with durians. That would look terrible, right?" Ha ha ha. The girls at the reception looked at me with wide eyes, nodding eagerly like they wanted to see right through me. SOS. I retracted my previous compliment about him being funny. He totally deserved to be hit by Abel. After Matthew Blake finished speaking, he pointed the way for me, saying, "Sister-in-law, come with me." Ha ha. I nodded and made a graceful exit, under the eager gazes of the group of girls, leaving without taking anything with me. Along the way, Matthew Blake chatted non-stop, like a chatterbox. He said, "Not long ago, I took my kids on their honeymoon, and didn't manage to attend your wedding. But he's been mentioning you for quite a while now. So finally, I've met you." I curiously asked, "He mentions me?" As far as I knew, Abel, being the proud person he was, wouldn't talk about me publicly. Matthew Blake laughed even more, shaking his shoulders. "You have no idea. A few years ago, he was in a car accident. When he woke up, he was clearly restless about finding a woman named Alva killed, and he kept at it for years. He even said that during the time he was asleep, he turned into a dog. We all thought he was crazy. His parents even took him to see a shrink." "What? So that's how it was," Matthew Blake continued. "Who would have thought he actually found you? The world is truly a mysterious place." I froze. After he left, Abel had also been that crazed about searching for me. It felt as if my painful struggles and despair were shared by someone else on the other side of the city. I realized I was never alone. "Matthew Blake, I take back my earlier words. You truly are interesting." Perhaps my gaze was too filled with kindness, and Matthew Blake suddenly fell silent, stammering as he asked, "Sister-in-law, why are you looking at me like that?" I stood on my tiptoes and patted his broad shoulder, saying, "It's nothing. I'll definitely say some nice things about you, in front of your brother so he won't hit you." Matthew Blake burst into laughter and led me to Abel Stevens' office door, knocking on it before casually peeking inside, saying, "Bro, I brought someone for you. Aren't you going to come and see?" Then he turned to give me a knowing look. "My brother's office has decent soundproofing. This guy is so cheeky." Just before I could blow up, he scampered away, happier than a hefty child. "You two take your time chatting. I'm off to go home and accompany my kids. If I'm not there, they're going to miss me." And just like that, he vanished. Naturally, visiting Abel Stevens was a perfectly normal affair, but after Matthew Blake's antics, it made me feel like we were a couple who had just crossed hundreds of miles, ending a long-distance relationship. Joy and excitement mixed together, wrapping my heart tightly, as if the once parched places were receiving a long-awaited rain, springing forth refreshing streams. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The summer sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Abel Stevens' chiseled face, wrapping him in sunlight. I watched him from the shadows, and he met my gaze from the sunlight. I suddenly smiled, and mustered the courage to step out of the shadow, exposing myself to the sunlight alongside him. He was caught off guard as I hugged him and asked, "What's the matter, Did Matthew Blake make you laugh again? He's just like that. You don't have to mind him. I shook my head and said, I just suddenly felt I love you so much. Sure enough, Abel Stevens' ears turned red instantly, unusually transparent under the sunlight. He embraced me back, stuttering, you know how to flatter me. Then he buried his face in my shoulder, unable to suppress his laughter. A gentle breeze stirred, and the chilly air warmed under the sunlight, no longer bone-chilling cold, as if summer arrived in the blink of an eye. Due to Matthew Blake constantly boasting about how wonderful his honeymoon had been, Abel didn't mention it, but he was eager to find a chance to go out with me. Unfortunately, my work was extremely busy, and I couldn't get away. This neglected little puppy practically pretended to be pitiful every day. The critical point was that ever since I allowed his childishness, he acted like he was liberated. For instance, when he accidentally cut his hand, in the past, he would have hidden it well. Now, he deliberately bandaged it extravagantly. He could just put a sign saying, Alva chilled, I'm injured, come care about me, on his forehead. When that happened, I could only pat his head and tell him, it's nothing, you're not going to die. Then he would look particularly innocent and say, I'm hurt, I can't work anymore, let's go out to play. Yes, with that expression I love, confusing me, making it hard for me to refuse. Me, dude, you just scraped your skin, not lost a limb, come on. I knew he was just trying to find a way to go on a honeymoon. For a long time, he maintained this behavior. I couldn't take it anymore, and on the day of Kiksi Festival, I finally took a leave to go out with him. We went to an ancient town known for its lantern festival. The streets were filled with tourists wearing various hanfu, making for a beautiful sight that dazzled my eyes. At that moment, Abel Stevens covered my eyes and said, look at me, don't look at them. I'm handsome too. I was about to die laughing. He was definitely a childish goof, complimenting himself so openly. I feigned kissing his hand and said, I'm looking at the pretty girls, not at handsome guys. He reflexively withdrew his hand, unable to hide the smile forming at the corners of his mouth, saying, girls can't do that either. Great, even more childish. Because fireworks were banned here, all of the beautiful sceneries were crafted using LED lights. The river bank was shrouded in mist, and the sounds of insects chirping were intermittent. I loved everything about the scenery and the people. As the crowd grew louder and the lights all lit up, I excitedly looked at the lights in front of the curtain, eagerly wanting to call Abel to see. But when I turned around, I found him focused on me. The lights exploded in circles within his deep-set eyes, as if stars had been flipped over in the universe. I curiously asked, aren't you watching the Lantern Festival? There aren't any beautiful lights on my face. He suddenly smiled, disheveled hair partially covering his smiling eyes. Then he grabbed my hand, and squatted down to look at me. Who says there aren't? In your eyes. He pointed at my eyes. The lights reflected are stunning. Oh, how coincidental. I also thought the light in his eyes was beautiful. The noise of the crowd suddenly peaked, and he awkwardly covered my ears, then suddenly leaned in to kiss me. The lights in the back just happened to burst into their most dazzling display. In each other's eyes, we both saw our entire world filled with love. I asked, why did you suddenly kiss me? He appeared like a child who had just stolen candy, proudly saying, I didn't kiss you, I was kissing my whole world. The end.